Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today, I will be discussing a Chicago case. And I've been following this really closely since it started. But this week, we'll be talking about the disappearance of Kierra Coles. But before we dive into this case, what's your question for this week, Kelly?
Okay, I have a question that is fun. So let's think about it that way. I know we both love our pets. We've talked about them frequently on here. What was your first pet? Did you have like a guinea pig or a hamster, or did you like jump straight to dog?
I think dog. I had a bird when I was a kid, but I think we had my dog before we had my bird. I just had it was a little parakeet. But my dog we got when I was 4 or 5. Her name was Wrigley.
Wrigley!
And she lived through college. She was almost 20 years old.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah, she was great.
You guys probably maybe understand how perfect a name that is for Sam's first dog. Wrigley.
Yes.
Wrigley.
Yes, we are massive Cubs fans in my house.
We went through, so it's so funny that you mention Wrigley's life, because we had a similar situation where it was like 6th grade, and we got a dog, and her name was Gemini, and I loved her, I loved and loved her, and she lived until she was 13. So,
oh wow,
we had an amazing life with her, but what led up to getting Gemini was a string of dead goldfish. Like,
oh no.
Oh, so many goldfish were sacrificed on our way to Gemini. I don't know what I did to them, but they don't live. They don't live around me.
We did have a ton of goldfish. I actually did forget about that. You kind of jogged my memory. My mom ran like the school fairs when I was a little kid, and she went all out. It was like a real mini fair for 5-year-olds. And there was a goldfish where you like throw the ping pong ball into the bowl and you can get a goldfish. Well, any leftover goldfish came home with us. So we had like 50 of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we just had this huge tank in the basement filled with these goldfish.
I bet, because, like, we're talking with, like, one goldfish at a time, and the mortality rate of these goldfish, we tried different tanks, we tried different kinds of goldfish. Every time I had a goldfish, we bought the goldfish, put it in a tank, and we gave it like the time to adjust the temperature. We did all the stuff that they told us at the pet store. And every morning, without fail, the next morning, I would wake up and that goldfish would be dead. Every morning. No. It happened like 8 times. One time we tried to get 2 goldfish. Fish. Yeah, I know. I'm a monster. We got two goldfish at once, thinking we're going to solve this. We figured it out. One died the next day, and then one died the day after that. And then finally, we got from a fair, just like what you just described with your mom, we got 2 goldfish just chilling in a pond that we got with ping pong balls. They were goldfish, like, from the streets. Like, that water was dirty.
They were tough.
Those bags were, and they were hardy. They lived a really long time until one time my mom, I love you, Mom, but you know that this is a true story. My mom moved the goldfish out of the tank to clean the tank. And she cleaned it. And she forgot that she had left, like, the last fishbowl full of hot water in there to make sure, like, the soap and stuff was out. And so she put the fish back into the hot water, and she boiled them.
Oh, poor fish.
Yeah, like they weren't fried or anything. We had them for a while. Like I was bummed out, but they were still just fish. And she did boil them though. And it gave me another opportunity to be like, can we get a dog now?
Yeah, we were surprised when we got my dog. My parents didn't tell us, so we just showed up and to a room full of puppies and came home with one.
Oh my God. That's so nice.
Yeah, no, she was great. She hated my sister. It was hilarious.
No. Oh no.
My sister would be like laying on the couch watching TV, and the dog would come up from her bed, sneeze in her face, and then go lay back down. She was very petty, and it was very funny from my point of view.
First of all, Ash, I'm sorry. Second of all, I totally see why that would be extremely funny. Because that is petty.
So funny.
Dogs have such
it was so petty.
Dogs have such a rich inner life, and like the pettiness that was alive in that dog. She was like, I have to sneeze, better go find Ash.
If there is any pet that I wish I could like get into the brain of and understand what was happening in their brain at the time, it's Wrigley. She hated people. She wouldn't let you pet her. Like, she was such a weird dog, but I loved her so much.
Yeah, she was sort of a dog that you observed more.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, yeah. You know, Gemini was sort of like that, too. She was a Shetland sheepdog, and so they basically look like a shrunken down collie, if you guys haven't seen one, because I asked my mom for a border collie, and she said, absolutely the hell not. And I don't blame her, because the fur. That's
a lot of fur.
And that's a lot of brushing. So we got the Shetland sheepdog shrunken down version. And you would have to let this dog out in the backyard, and she would run the perimeter of our yard because she's so used to herding. And when she was a puppy, my poor parents, this could not have been cheap. She blew out both her ACLs in her back puppy knees from running the backyard so much.
Yeah, my parents are worried about that with they have a pit bull, and she runs so fast and like really wears herself out that they're worried that she might risk pulling a muscle or something pretty bad. So they're always trying to like keep a cautious eye on her, because she just if you just let her go, she will run for circles forever. She loves it so much.
That's exactly how Gemini was. And when she was in the room with you, she wasn't so much into like cuddling with you either, just like you said Wrigley was. She was more interested in like patrolling the room and making sure that none of us left the room.
So Wrigley had her own chair. We got a wingback chair from a garage sale, and it was her throne, and it was the only furniture we allowed her on, because she was not a furniture dog, and she would just sit in the corner on her throne. It was hilarious.
That is so funny and so cute, and that it was a wingback chair. That's hilarious.
It was like this big floral wingback chair with like velvet sides, and it was like $5 at a garage sale, but that was hers.
Speaking of pets, Dale might have just heard a little harumph back there. That's Arthur. Arthur, you be good. Sorry.
No worries. Rigby finally went down and laid down. We'll see if he comes back up. And he's been very playful this morning, throwing around all of his noisy toys. But let's get into today's case. I'm glad you brought us a good question and a uplifting question, because this is one that's very frustrating.
Okay.
So today we're going to be talking about Kierra Coles. She was a postal worker, and she disappeared when she was 27 years old on October 2nd, 2018. And unfortunately, there's been no sign of her since.
Wow.
There isn't a ton of information on this case. There are quite a few different articles, but they all are pretty short and really just follow the same talking points. And the other articles I've read that seem to go a little bit more in depth on this case get some basic information wrong.
Oh, okay.
And it's things such as the day she disappeared, which that kind of makes sense. We'll come back to this later. But they also misreport her age when she disappeared. They say that she was 26 when in reality she was 27. So I did everything I could to find the most consistent and accurate information. But there are some publications that I don't know well, and I'm trying to do my best to trust them because they seem to have some of the accurate information all in one. But please know there might be a couple slight differences throughout this. I even saw an article on medium.com that very specifically pointed this out because if you read 2 or 3 articles, you'll see that there's a lot of differences in this.
Medium.com pointed out that there's a lot of inconsistencies in the reporting.
Yes.
That makes sense because I love Medium. I use them as a source a lot.
Okay, good. I'm glad that you know them because I haven't really read much about them. And they did put out a longer, detailed article on this. Again, there were a couple mistakes in that article that I believe they reported on. So that's why I'm like, they put it out. I appreciate that because I've been noticing that myself. But there's a couple things in their article that I still think is wrong.
Right.
I could be wrong, definitely. But based on other information, there's a couple things that don't quite make sense that they said.
No, let's talk about it.
So Kierra was born on September 24th, 1991, and she grew up in the Chatham neighborhood in Chicago. She has 3 older siblings, 2 sisters and 1 brother, and 1 younger sibling, another sister. And family really meant a lot to her. She was very close with her siblings, and she spoke to her mom daily on the phone.
Oh, okay.
And her mom's name is Karen. Yes, that's very, very close family.
That's very frequently daily. I understand. I'm very close with my family too. I talk to them a lot, but I don't know if we talk like specifically on the phone daily. Also, another thing that I just reacted to was just that 91. She would be the same age as me right now.
Yeah, just a few months younger than you.
That is awful.
And I want to point out her mom's name is Karen because she becomes a really big part of this case. So I'll just be referring to her as Karen.
Okay.
But she's currently fighting so hard to find answers for her daughter and just find her daughter. Because I'll tell you right now, we still don't know where she is.
Wow.
So a little bit about Kierra. Her mom says she was incredibly driven. She worked 2 jobs. She drove for Lyft, and she worked with the United States Postal Service, which we'll talk about them quite a bit. I'll just call them USPS for shortening it. And she worked sorting mail and delivering mail. She really wanted a career with USPS, and she actually started as a temporary employee, which kind of had like a yearly renewal for the role. And she went back for 3 years.
Wow.
So she kept pushing and renewing this job, which I'm kind of assuming is kind of resubmitting an application.
Right.
Because you're expected to only work a year.
Okay, yeah. So like a contract. I'm not sure if this is, it would make sense, but maybe the reason she kept going back to them is I think that's a government job. USPS?
It is a government job.
Yeah, so that's probably why she really was interested in a career with them. Maybe.
Exactly. And this goal of hers and going back each year did pay off. She did get a permanent job with USPS. She was very much the type of person to set goals for herself. And in an interview, Karen talked about a couple different goals that she had set fairly recently that she had achieved. She got enough money to get her own apartment and live alone.
Mm-hmm.
And she also got enough money to buy a good and reliable car.
Oh,
And she recently accomplished both of those things.
that's a lot. That's incredible. At only 27, like, she's doing it. She's out here doing it.
Exactly. And she didn't necessarily do this all alone. Like, the work itself, she did. But her boyfriend, Josh, was by her side the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time of her disappearance, they had been dating for 6 years.
Oh, poor Josh.
And I'm sure this, I'm sure this was important to Karen as well. But, this was important to Kierra as well, because Karen openly said she really liked Josh and she thought that they made a really good couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, by all accounts, it seems like Kierra had the life that she wanted and was working really hard for.
Mm-hmm.
And a few weeks before Kierra disappeared, she actually found out some news that she was very excited about, that she was pregnant and due in April of 2019.
Oh.
And one of the next steps in her life goal plan was to start a family. So she was extremely excited about this. She couldn't wait to tell her family.
Oh my gosh. This poor woman and her poor family.
Mm-hmm.
Pregnant.
This is one reason why I've been following this case from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really been in the news, I think, a fair amount for how little information there is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
good.
It's
good to see that I'm still seeing coverage, but nothing's changed for a long time. So let's get to her disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
On October 3rd, 2018, Karen called Kierra around 8 a.m. and it rang through to voicemail.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't necessarily weird because maybe Kierra's at work,
mm-hmm.
but it was kind of weird to Karen.
Different.
At least not to get, I'm assuming not to get a text back or something just to say,
mm-hmm.
I'll call you later or something like that. That was never explicitly said.
Right.
But I know that's how my mom and I are.
Absolutely, yeah, because this is 2018, so she could have texted her mom back and said, like, I'll call you
Absolutely.
X. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Karen continued to call a couple times that morning, mm-hmm. along with one of Kierra's sisters, and they only ever got Kierra's voicemail. And this was weird to Karen because the previous night, on October 2nd, Karen had talked to Kierra on the phone around 7 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Kierra had that day off, October 2nd, and she was saying that she just needed to do some errands. She needed to go grocery shopping. And she was also talking about being excited for the baby. Mm-hmm. And Kierra mentioned that she wanted to take it easy. She didn't want to risk a miscarriage, so mm-hmm. she just was kind of taking things slowly a day at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's the way you gotta do it.
Exactly. And it's her first child, so I'm sure that there's a lot of nervousness that comes with it, with excitement. And it's like, you want to do everything because you want to be prepared, but mm-hmm. she was slowing herself down and giving her that time to do it healthily.
Yeah, I understand why she would split, like, one task into one day. Like this day I will go grocery shopping. Because you're pregnant and you're going to have to lift all that food and all those bags. And so, so it makes sense that she was like, one thing a day, let's slow it down.
Exactly. And hold on to that exact thought. Because that will actually come back later.
I will. Okay.
So after Karen couldn't get a hold of Kierra, she decided to head over to her apartment that afternoon and check on her. Mm-hmm. The apartment was locked, and Karen wasn't able to see into any of the windows, so she called Josh. Mm-hmm. And Kierra lived alone, and Josh said he didn't have a key and he didn't see her that morning, but he said that he would head over to the apartment right away to meet Karen there.
Okay, so they've been... That's interesting to me. I'm sorry, that pinged. That he doesn't have a key to her apartment.
Yep, and we'll again talk about that a bit later.
Okay.
You're right,
sorry.
it is weird, and I had the same exact thought when I read this in the articles.
Go on. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good. And while Karen was waiting on Josh, she also called the police. Mm-hmm. She wanted to do a welfare check. Mm-hmm. And the police took Karen's concerns very seriously. And they actually removed the front door from the hinges to go inside.
Wow. Okay.
So, yes, the police are stepping in right away, which is something we don't always see.
Yeah.
When they went inside, they saw that the TV was on and that the groceries that Kierra had purchased seemed to have been put away. Nothing else really seemed off. But if you remember, this really gives me Springfield 3 vibes, case that we covered in episode 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, just walking into the house, TV's on, everything looks normal. But the people who live in the house are gone. Right.
I'm waiting to hear more. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, there's definitely some weird stuff to still be noticed here. After they didn't really discover anything in the apartment, Karen noticed that Kierra's car was parked down the street. Mm-hmm. And for any of you who are kind of unfamiliar with Chicago, there often isn't a parking lot that comes with your building, or if it does, it's usually crazy expensive.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just choose to street park, and it's a free-for-all. It's sometimes you get a spot close to your apartment, sometimes you get a spot 10 blocks away. Mm-hmm. You never really know where you're going to end up. Mm-hmm. But Karen thought that this was weird because she luckily often got spots right in front of her apartment, and being parked down the street immediately was kind of like, that's not normal for her.
Oh, and
especially if she's carrying groceries.
You're right. It just came around for me. Down the street and she had groceries. That is strange.
Yeah, and it just coincides exactly with that comment and your exact thought with it, that it was a little weird, especially since it was out of the norm for her to park that far away from her building.
It's also odd to me that I'm sorry, I lost what it is that pinged for me. But it's just so...
As a whole, it's weird. As a whole, especially with the groceries aspect.
Oh, I was going to say that in Chicago, it's not terribly weird to see someone throw their hazard lights on and unload their groceries in front of their building and then maybe go find a parking spot. So I would assume that might be what she would have done, but it seems like
very possible.
Weird. It seems like weird that it seems like she parked it down the street and carried these back. Because that's what it sounds like.
Which we don't know that for sure, but just the fact that Karen noticed it is weird. Like Karen immediately recognizing that was not normal in combination with the potential of her carrying these groceries, with seeing evidence that groceries were purchased and put away. Like all of that combined is bizarre.
Yes. Yeah.
So once they looked into her car, they could easily see Kierra's purse through the window. And she really used her purse more so as a lunchbox for work. So this wasn't necessarily like incredibly concerning that her purse was there. Because I don't know if she kept anything of importance in her purse. I never got that clarification.
Because that's just another, I'm sure you may have heard of in my there. It's odd that even, I know she probably used it as a lunchbox, but if it were me, and I know many people in Chicago, typically wouldn't leave anything that looks like a purse or a bag or anything of valuable visible through the window.
Oh, no.
I don't know. I
But
don't
like,
know. Yeah.
I've had my car broken into before, and it was
Right.
the only things that were stolen were like my cigarette charger plug
Mm-hmm.
for my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like everyone has one of those in their car, so I didn't really think too much about it. I also bought it for like
Mm-hmm.
$3 from Walgreens, so
Yeah.
it was like it wasn't that important to me. But my car was broken into, and that was stolen. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like people will break into your car and steal anything
Yeah.
if they can get in.
Yeah. And that's true of all cities. Please, when you go somewhere, put your purse underneath your passenger seat so nobody smashes your window. Thank you. That's my announcement.
Yes. But they did get a locksmith to open up her
Mm-hmm.
car, and they
Mm-hmm.
confirmed that she had packed a lunch. She had a few pieces of fruit, water, and her prenatal vitamins in the purse.
Okay.
They also found her cell phone in the car.
Oh.
And Kierra was scheduled to work that day, but it seems like she had actually called off of work. And like they actually contacted the person who talked to her on the phone at USPS and confirmed that yes, it was her on the phone.
Okay.
But like that's reported through multiple sources. So I don't necessarily want to rely on that information because I didn't see like confirmation. We spoke to USPS and they confirmed this. It was like we spoke to this person and they said that they heard that she called in.
Right, but there's a strong possibility that she had called in sick to work that day of
Yes.
December 3rd. Is that where we are right now?
October 3rd.
October 3rd. Okay, so there's evidence there that she may have called off work sick that day.
Yes, and I did read something as well that was, I believe it was a quote from her mom saying that she had actually taken the 2 previous days off using her paid time off. And so I could potentially understand if she took those days off to do some specific things and she realized she needed an extra day to get it done, whether she went on a trip, which it doesn't sound like she did since she was talking to her mom about going grocery shopping and staying local. But just the idea of like she took 2 days off, maybe she needs a third, she called in sick. I can understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's no explanation. That's just kind of me theorizing.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so we don't really even know that.
So this obviously made Karen panic. And this was all, I believe, happened really fast that all this information came forward. And they're still searching the car. So there becomes this moment of panic for Karen as they go towards the trunk of the car.
Oh, God.
She thought there was a possibility of finding her daughter in there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh. Poor
Luckily,
Karen.
she wasn't in there. So, like, it's a good thing, but there's still no answers.
No, yeah.
What they did find was Kierra's work gear, her USPS jacket, and her push cart for delivering mail.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, in my opinion, this looks like she was just fully getting ready for work.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a normal work day. Like, she was getting ready. She had her lunch packed. She had her gear in the trunk. And she was ready to go.
Exactly. So, then the news hit that there was a 27-year-old pregnant postal worker who was missing. And I remember this happening. I definitely saw this in the news within, I think, a day or two of her disappearance. And there was so little information that it really, you didn't know where to look. You know that she was in the Chatham neighborhood of Chicago, but there just wasn't anything really beyond that.
Right.
You don't know what circumstances she disappeared in.
Yeah.
And all we really knew is what the family was saying is it doesn't seem like she would have chosen to disappear.
Yes, because she had she talked to her family daily. She was excited. She be in this next goal. Do you know if I often ask this and bring this up in cases, did they start a tip line?
They do have a specific line, and I have the number at the end of this.
Okay. Well, they
did do some things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because when you have nothing, like, that's sort of one of the only things you can start with. So I was curious.
Exactly. And this is when Regina Waldrop from NBC News started to cover this story. And she was pretty big in trying to find answers pretty early on. She had the biggest push, I think, of any of the news sources. Mm-hmm. And Regina immediately felt very connected to this case because when she was a kid, her sister disappeared for 2 weeks after going to a club. Oh. And unfortunately, her sister was drugged and raped, but luckily had the ability to come home 2 weeks later.
Oh, at least she came home.
So, yes, exactly. And Regina, she actually didn't even want to tell Karen these details because of her sister still went through some truly horrific things, but it did have a good ending. But she didn't want to put those horrific things into Karen's head. So she really kept this information private. She just wanted to do what she could to bring Kierra home.
Yes. Yes. Commendable.
So Regina goes to meet with Karen outside of Kierra's apartment. And she noticed right away that Kierra's car was still there down the block. She could still look in the window, see her purse with her lunch on it through the window, and she immediately started wondering why the car was not taken in to be forensically investigated.
I was wondering the exact same thing as soon as you told me that car was still sitting there. Because do you know a rough time frame of when they found her to be missing versus once Regina got there?
I don't, unfortunately. And I tried to find that. There's actually a video that I watched that interviewed Regina and Karen, and they kind of went into depth on their story, but they didn't provide too much of a timeline within the story.
Okay, that's fair. Either way, I am in full questioning with this story, which was, it seems like the day you found that car, you should have taken it in for forensics.
Exactly. And another thing that was noticed after her disappearance was a handful of cameras on neighboring apartments. And a local victims advocate, Andrew Holmes, went and canvassed these neighboring apartments to see if he could get his hands on this footage and hopefully get some more information, minimally a direction. So, again, this brings up the question, is why the police didn't take the car into forensic investigation and try to get their hands on this camera footage right away.
Wow, you're right. That does, because it was a local victims advocate who went and canvassed the cameras. Interesting. Maybe it was 2018 and they weren't thinking. No, this isn't normal. I don't think this is normal.
One thing I do want to point out with this as well is, like, just looking at it, it seems like the police were cautious enough immediately when Karen brought forward the need for a wellness check that they took action. And I think it's important to note here that some articles do say police were involved in this neighborhood canvassing, while this interview with Karen and Regina, they don't mention any police involvement in this process. Okay. So this is kind of where some of the reporting gets a little foggy.
Okay.
So keep that in mind. There's a very good possibility the police did have their hands on this footage. But
yes.
It might be the way that they're wanting to tell the story.
Or what they're willing to release at the time. Like, they may have already gotten that footage, and then at the same time, this man, Andrew Holmes, goes around and asks for it again when the police had actually already taken it in. Yeah.
So I don't want to, sit here and say, the police are doing nothing. I honestly think that there's a very good possibility they're doing stuff. It's just not being talked about, which there's nothing really wrong with that. They're conducting their investigation, and when they have more to bring forward, they hopefully will. That's the whole point of an investigation like this.
And Sam, you and I say in a lot of these cases that we've covered in the past, I can't believe it's almost been 30 episodes, but we often say one of the best things that police do in great investigative work is hold back information that they have that could potentially implicate someone. So maybe that's what they're trying to do here. Yeah.
We'll see. More stuff will slowly come out through this. I'm interested in your opinion in some things that happen in the future.
Okay.
So now both Andrew and Regina are going door to door, talking to neighbors, trying to get this camera footage. And Regina says that she was at one apartment building a couple doors down from Kierra's apartment when someone came up to her and said that they actually had camera footage of Kierra on the day she went missing, October 3rd.
Oh.
In this video, you can see a woman in their USPS uniform walking down the block. She starts to walk towards the direction of the car, but she ends up walking past the car and out of view. When Karen watched this footage, she thought there could be a pretty simple explanation because she was very casually walking. She didn't seem in distress at all. And she thought maybe she was walking down the street and saw somebody and just went off camera to talk to them, but maybe returned to her car or in that time off camera disappeared. So she thought it was like potentially just very simple. It was unexpected on Kierra's part if she disappeared in that, but that you would assume in that sort of case it would be someone that she knew that she was talking to, and that's her train of thought.
And they would come forward and say, I saw her that day. Also,
I saw her that day, or if they didn't, maybe they're the suspect. Like, that's kind of
exactly
thought process at this moment.
Yeah, what pings for me as well is that it says you can see them in their USPS uniform when Kierra's uniform was in her trunk, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Her jacket was in her trunk. Just the jacket.
Okay.
So, like, you could clearly see the pants, because you know the pants are like a navy blue with a darker navy blue stripe down the side. You could very clearly see that in this video.
Okay.
So Kierra's information was entered into NamUs, the National Missing Person and Unidentified Persons System. And I actually went into NamUs to look her up. And I don't know if it was my computer, but I did find her. I did search in it, so it gave me the link to her page. But when I went to load her page, it was just blank. Like, the heading for NamUs was on the top, but there was nothing. So it could be my computer just not wanting to load it, but that was interesting to me. But according to Medium.com, she is listed in NamUs as a non-suspicious missing person.
Okay.
But with her missing being listed as non-suspicious, that's basically saying that she disappeared not under suspicious circumstances.
Oh, so they're potentially saying she may have left according to her own free will?
That's my assumption. Like, I don't want to say that like very specifically because that's not exactly what it says. It just says non-suspicious.
Okay.
But that's my assumption based on that wording.
Okay.
So this caused a lot of problems for Karen because she really wanted to be able to review Kierra's phone records, but she didn't know the password to her phone. So it would actually require a warrant to get into the phone. But since she was listed as non-suspicious, she couldn't get a warrant.
What?
Yeah. So my understanding is she's still never been able to review the phone records. At least I've seen no update saying that she could.
Oh my
So
god.
that
Is there, in the story, is there any other mention of these phone records?
no. This was
Wow. Okay.
the Medium article was the only one that mentioned it.
Wow. So maybe police can't even pursue that avenue. Or
Maybe.
I don't know.
Well, the police are
Maybe
the
not.
ones who are listing her as non-suspicious.
Right. So maybe that's blocking like these officers who are interested in solving it from getting a warrant. I don't know.
Yeah, and again, this was that Medium article. You said you liked them as a
Mm-hmm.
source. I found a
Mm-hmm.
few things in this article that I don't fully trust.
Yeah.
So
And
take it
that's
with a
fair.
grain of salt. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like this was important to mention because cell phones can give
Yeah.
so much evidence. And
Yeah.
I've
I can't
seen
believe
no
that.
report of cell phone records.
And I've never heard of a disappearing person because they're listed as non-suspicious not being able to get a warrant. That is brand new information to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that could be fully wrong. Please take it with a grain of salt. But I felt like it was worth noting.
No, there's interesting facts there.
And this is really where the investigation stalled. For years, this is all the article said about her disappearance. And I saw articles about her probably every 6 months or so
Mm-hmm.
that basically repeated the same information and showed that video,
Mm-hmm.
that surveillance video walking down the street.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But Karen was still questioning a lot of different things in this time. One of them being Josh.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he didn't have a key to Kierra's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
She thought that was very weird as well.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually remembers a conversation she had with Kierra where Kierra mentioned she was going to give Josh a key.
Oh.
So it seems more understandable that Josh would have a key than not have one based on this information.
Yes.
Kierra had been
Yes.
dating him for 6 years. She was pregnant with his child.
Okay.
And she had mentioned that she was going to give him a key. So
Right.
there isn't a confirmation that she did give him one, but everything added up would make a lot of sense why she would.
Right. Everything, if I were Karen, everything would line up to mean that he would have a key or at the very least a way in. You know, I feed my friends cats and I have a key to their apartment. You know, I'm not pregnant with their child.
Say you don't have a key now to mine, but I gave you one while cat sitting for me.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there was one other thing that really made her start questioning him in particular. And it was his actions or lack of action after Kierra disappeared.
Mm.
While Karen and her family, reporters, victim advocates, and potentially police are going door to door to try to find a lead, Josh wasn't there helping him. Instead, he moved out of state.
What?
Yeah. So let's dive into Josh a little bit.
Let's hear it.
We've learned some things.
This better be good. That's all I gotta say.
Just wait. Up until this point, Karen really said that she liked Josh. And as I mentioned earlier, she thought Kierra and Josh were a great couple. Josh also worked for the USPS since 2010. And I believe he helped or encouraged her to also get a job with the USPS, which she was choosing to do as her career.
Mm-hmm.
Karen made a point in saying that Josh always seemed very respectful. And when he saw him with Kierra, he never raised his voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that just outwardly seemed like they had a good relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But Josh did not always show Kierra that respect. Josh cheated on Kierra multiple times, which led to having multiple children with multiple different women.
Wait. While he was dating her?
Yes. Oh, it gets a little bit better here, too. Around the time Kierra found out she was pregnant, a woman that Josh was cheating on Kierra with also discovered she was pregnant.
Oh my.
And it also seems likely that Josh was living with this woman at the time of Kierra's disappearance.
What in the shady shit is this?
Yeah, so I don't know how much Karen knew of all of this. Mm-hmm. I have the feeling if she knew all of these details, she wouldn't have spoken so highly of him. But
maybe
honestly,
not.
I don't know.
Maybe not. I would say that, like, the only reason I would think she would know those details is because she talked to her daughter every day on the phone. But that doesn't mean her daughter... Wondering. That doesn't mean her daughter didn't leave out pertinent things like this.
Exactly. There's definitely the possibility Kierra didn't want to tell her mom these details.
Right, because you don't want...
Despite being so close.
Yeah, you don't want that to affect your parents', view of your partner. But this seems like some really significant shade. Again, what in the shady shit that you need to tell somebody about.
Yeah, so... But then, so now Kierra's family are trying to reach Josh to just ask him questions. They don't officially have a suspicion of him. They just want to know what he knows from around that time. Mm-hmm. And they just wanted him to come forward with any sort of information that might be helpful, even if he doesn't think that information is currently helpful. Like, just start talking and saying what you were doing in those days and just kind of the basics of that.
Right. Did you interact at all? Like, and again, that's another thing that you and I say a lot, which is like anything that you think is small might be huge. So, like, I completely understand why her family is trying to get anything from him. Like, did you text her even?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you said, you hadn't heard from her on the 3rd, but what was your last interaction on the 2nd like?
Right.
Like, just even if it was a phone call, like that could lead to something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're trying to get a hold of him. They're trying to do everything, but they couldn't even get a hold of him when he left town. They didn't. They knew nothing. He just wouldn't answer calls. Nothing.
I can't believe that. I cannot believe that he would leave the state and not answer the calls from the family. Like, that is so... I'm sorry, but I calls him like I sees him, and that is some suspicious behavior.
And so this case, again, is very much at a standstill. The USPS Inspection Service, which is essentially like a police force for the USPS specifically, along with the National Association of Mail Carriers, put together a award of $27,500. Oh. Eventually, that award would increase to $50,000, and then nearly to $65,000.
Wow!
So people want her back, and they want to know, and there's a lot of people banding behind her to make this happen.
Yeah, when I first heard you say, like, the USPS Inspection Service and the National Association of Mail Carriers, like, that is, like, her community that she was a part, and they're all rallying to find her. That's a bright spot here.
Kierra's dad, he lived in Wisconsin at the time. He actually quit his job to move back to Chicago and lived out of his car in front of Kierra's apartment. And he said he wouldn't leave until she was found.
Oh.
Like, her family loves her so much.
Oh my gosh. That poor man.
Yeah. I don't know what year he did that, but, like, this has been years at this point.
I just can't imagine the position this family is in. Not only her mother, who's actively trying to get this all solved, but now her father and her siblings and, you know, knowing that she was pregnant and excited, and now this, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So then in summer of 2022, big news hit.
Mm-hmm.
Karen went in front of reporters to publicly announce that she and authorities know that Kierra was not in that surveillance video that was flooding the news when she disappeared.
Oh, okay.
That woman in the USPS uniform was not Kierra.
Mm-hmm. I remember this now. I remember her going on
I
the
watched
news.
this news conference live and I sent it to you and I was flipping out. I was so upset.
Yeah, I remember this now, that they were like that security footage, and we've known for what? I'll let you go on with the story, but I remember them saying like, no, we know it was Bupkis.
Yeah, and it's not only that they were just aware that it wasn't her, it was exactly what you said, that they had known for a long time. So this is 4 years after her disappearance.
Uh-huh.
I don't know within that time that they knew, but I think it was years based on the context that everyone's talking about it.
Okay. Wow.
And I'm sure that Karen just watched this video on repeat, trying to figure out what was going through Kierra's head in that moment when she noticed that this person walks differently than Kierra, and that's how she figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
So she brought this information to detectives, and they told her they knew and not to tell anyone. Yeah.
What?
They purposely released this video. I'm not sure if when they released it, they knew, or if they found out after they released it, but they minimally let this video continue to circulate with the knowledge this was not Kierra. Right.
So that's just misinformation in her disappearance, just circulating and circulating. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it really just turns out that this woman who lived on Kierra's block was also a postal worker, and she's the one who was in the video, which is why she walked right past the car. Like, understandably, that created a confusing situation. But the moment they realized it wasn't Kierra, they just let it go and let it stay out there.
Wow.
And Karen says that the police hoped that not reporting that this video was unrelated, that it would end up incriminating someone who knew that it might not be her or knew some more details. But this shocked me. This was disappointing to me.
And that reasoning makes no sense to me.
I fully understand pulling information and not letting the public know details. I fully get that.
Right.
But putting out false information?
Yeah, that is what is I'm like, red flag, red flag, red flag, because you've got to tell everybody, oh no, this is not the last sighting of her. So we technically don't know if she, quote, suspiciously or unsuspiciously disappeared.
Exactly. And they're pleading with the public to help find her, and this is the information that they're giving us. Yeah. As a local Chicagoan, I want to see this case be solved. And as somebody who is local, and even though I'm sure not going to be the person to solve it just because of statistics, I'm keeping an eye on it. And what if I saw something? Well, now you're giving me something to look out for that's 100% unrelated.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So you're setting yourself up for a bunch of, for a ton of people who may come forward to be completely not helpful because they're not seeing the correct information. That is shocking. You're right.
Yeah, I just was like, I was blown away watching this press conference.
Yeah.
And it was at this time that Karen also started to plead for the FBI's involvement. Karen made these statements to NBC News and and NBC News followed up by wanting to ask the Chicago Police Department for comment, but they didn't respond. Which, again, I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing. The police do want to keep pieces of the case private, but at the same time, like, this is a big thing that, like, needs a little bit of explanation in my personal opinion.
In my personal opinion, it warrants at least the boilerplate response, which is we do not comment on active investigations.
Exactly.
And yet it says here they didn't even reply.
That's what NBC News is saying, is they got no response from them.
Okay.
Yeah. So then NBC News followed up by asking the FBI to comment.
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI said, quote, "The FBI is always willing to work with law enforcement partners to the greatest extent possible to provide critical resources on local cases," which to me sounds like the Chicago police have not invited them into this case. That's my assumption, but that's a very canned response that seems like they haven't been brought in.
Yeah, that's very canned. That's very, we don't comment on ongoing investigations. You know, so exactly. It's like, yeah, so the canned response here, like, as you called it, is such a good way to put it. Because, again, that also gives me the impression that CPD, the Chicago Police Department, has not discussed any details with them or made anything visible to them in this. Which you just said,
for those of you who might not be aware, local officers in the local jurisdiction has to invite the FBI to the case. So the FBI can't do anything until local jurisdiction asks them for help.
Oh, okay. So even if somebody commits like a federal crime, the FBI can't like swoop in, like you
well, that's different. Like, this isn't a federal crime. This is a local disappearance.
Okay. So
the local jurisdiction is the Chicago police. A federal crime could then be federal investigators as the main jurisdiction.
But something like this, yeah, they have to be asked to participate. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of cases where you'll see families pleading for FBI involvement, but sometimes they can't do anything until that invite comes from the local jurisdiction.
Right. Okay. Wow.
So I believe in response to Karen now going public with this information about the false surveillance video, the police do release some more information and a new video. This time, Kierra is actually in the video. And the video is taken from Walgreens in Cottage Grove, which is another nearby Chicago neighborhood. And she was withdrawing money at 10:43 p.m. on October 2nd. So almost 4 hours after Karen talked to Kierra on the phone. Karen says she withdrew about $400, which she said was very weird for Kierra. She was very frugal with her money, which makes a lot of sense. She was working so hard for these goals. She got her own apartment. She got her own car. She now is pregnant. She has to save for the baby.
Yes, that was my thought. Is like, she's probably trying to save up for all the incidentals that having a baby means, you know?
Exactly. And, like, I don't know Kierra's salary with USPS and Lyft. That's absolutely none of my business. But I can tell you, living alone in Chicago is not cheap. And then on top of with what we were just saying, while you're also expecting a baby, it's very expensive to live alone in Chicago. And it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and it sounds like she was truly alone. Like, this guy, Josh, is not helping out at all. He's busy
He's supposedly living with this other woman.
Yeah, He's living at
exactly.
some house with some other lady. He got pregnant, and she's doing this on her own. I mean, you know, I can't pretend to know Kierra's thoughts, and perhaps she still loved him and wanted this baby to have both its parents and hope it worked out. But it does sound like he wasn't helping her with anything. Like,
that's my assumption. And again, this is just our own theories. We don't know any of this, but putting together the few pieces we know, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And it makes it odd that she would withdraw $400.
$400 is a lot of money. Like,
it's a lot of money.
It doesn't necessarily go too far, like when you talk about current inflation, but that's still a lot of money.
And sometimes, like, the ATM in the bottom of my basement or in the bottom of my building, you can only withdraw $200 at a time. So to get that amount of money out of an ATM in, like, a corner store, you would have to do 2 transactions. So that's...
Well, not necessarily. It depends on
the
who
ATM.
runs the ATM. Because I do know, I've watched this video. It is a Citibank ATM, so it's their own, and maybe she banked with Citibank, and you can pull out more. So,
okay, yeah,
like
that's
you're
true.
right, it could easily be multiple transactions, but at the same time, it has the potential of being one. So,
right, it's not like
either way, it's
$400,000. Yeah, either way,
exactly.
It's $400.
But the police also released a timeline of Kierra's movements on the night of October 2nd.
Finally.
They said, yes, and this is where things get even more bizarre. So they said a man arrived at Kierra's apartment, and then a short while later, Kierra and this man left in Kierra's car, and Kierra was driving. I'm assuming this is all footage from the neighbors.
Yeah.
Same neighbors that they probably got the other false footage from. Because their camera angles, you could like see the front of her building and stuff. So I'm assuming this is where it's all coming from.
Right.
Which is why I mentioned earlier, I think the police did get the camera footage, even though it was reported that they didn't. Because they wouldn't have all of this without them going to get it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So while they were out, they stopped by this ATM, but it was only Kierra in the video. And the ATM's like right next to the door of Walgreens. So understandably, she could have just hopped out, ran in for a minute or two, pulled out money, left. And it was a very short video that they released. And later that night, around 11:45, Kierra's car was seen being parked. Some reports said a different area of the city. They don't say where. I have no clue. I've tried to figure it out. But also some reports just say parked the car. My personal assumption is parked on her street. Because I saw no report of it being moved. Yeah.
Okay. So where they found it is, we're assuming where they parked it. Okay. Makes sense.
And then in this video, they see a man exiting out of the passenger side of the vehicle, but no one exiting out the driver's side. And that's just weird.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, like, unless he was like a Lyft passenger.
It's a parked car.
That's weird.
Like, they just parked it and someone exited out of the passenger side. But then this person walks down the block to another vehicle, gets in and drives away. Then the next morning, this person returns to Kierra's apartment. He was only in there for a short time, and he left holding some items in his hands. The police have said they've talked to this man. They haven't given his name. They say they talked to him, and that he has given some inconsistent stories. And that he is a person of interest. They've said nothing else. And like, this is kind of where what you and I were talking about earlier with keeping information close to the vest. I understand that. And I think that this isn't necessarily a bad place to stop for the police releasing information. because this seems like this could be a very viable person of interest, and you don't want to give too much away. And we've seen this in a lot of really big cases. Delphi, information is just now coming out after an arrest was made. Similar with the Long Island serial killer. Like, we didn't know so much for so long, which was a true benefit to the police. So I'm confused why the wrong video was released purposely, but I also think that they're not necessarily doing the wrong thing in this moment by not continuing this conversation.
Yeah. Like, I think they released not... it's probably tricky because he's only a person of interest. He's not a suspect. But the only thing that I would have loved to have seen beyond what they did release, which was, you know, there was a man there. Be on the lookout for anyone strange in the area. He left with some items. If you see anything weird in the area, let us know. The only thing I would have loved to see is a description of this man. But I imagine maybe with his status as just a person of interest, they can't release that. I don't know.
They didn't release any identifying things about him, which, again, I agree. This is kind of like a fine line to walk. You either release it or you don't. You shouldn't be doing anything like wishy-washy with it. And I think if he was a suspect, his name probably would have been discussed. But,
or at least a height, a facial hair, identifying marker, something. But maybe they can't because he's not yet a suspect. I don't know.
But obviously, with all this information, we got a very different timeline of events than we originally thought. Up until now, we thought she disappeared on the 3rd, but she was last confirmed to actually have been seen on the 2nd, and no sightings of her on the 3rd. And it's also, like, as we were just saying, like, who is this man that they're referring to as a person of interest and not naming him? Well, Karen chose to name him.
I bet she did.
She says it was Josh.
Wow. So we think, you know what? I'm going to let you go on because I'm going to let that sit for a minute. Karen says
this really doesn't necessarily give us a lot of information. Like it does. We have a timeline which is really beneficial, but there's no confirmation of Josh's involvement in this.
No,
there's not.
No.
And I think that's important to be said at this point because they were in a relationship. It's not uncommon in any way that they would have spent time together on the 2nd.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
the weirdest thing is the car thing, but maybe there's an explanation. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do kind of want to break this down a little bit. And just for the ease of the conversation, I am going to use Josh's name. Just because it'll hopefully make it clearer as we talk. But as we just said, he may have zero involvement in this.
Yeah.
Because I'm a bit wishy-washy on it. I'm not entirely sure if he does or he doesn't. I honestly, I don't know.
All we can know, I mean, thus far, you know, from what I've heard from you, is that all we can confirm is there was a man with her. And he came back the next day and exited her apartment. We can't, you know, definitively say who this man was, and we probably shouldn't. But for ease here, Josh's name we already know.
Exactly. So saying this is Josh, he shows up at Kierra's apartment the evening of the 2nd. The police didn't give us a specific time. I don't think that's super important. The times become more important later. So he either convinces her to withdraw money from the ATM or she chooses to withdraw money on her own. Like one of my first thoughts with withdrawing money potentially is she's expecting a baby. Maybe she went on Facebook Marketplace and wanted to buy something from somebody. Like there's totally innocent explanations to the money, especially $400. Like That's not an insane amount of money, but maybe you could buy something that you really need for a nursery.
I was going to say baby shit. I don't have one of my own offspring running around, but I do have friends that do. And from my knowledge, baby stuff is incredibly expensive, and $400 would not at all be odd. For
exactly. So, like, I don't want to say that, like, she was coerced into withdrawing money, but it is still a possible part of this case.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do know is at 11:43, she was confirmed to be in this Walgreens withdrawing money from her own account. This was not anyone else doing it. It was her.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an hour before the car is then parked. And again, I assume the car is outside her apartment and not in another neighborhood like some of the articles mentioned, just because I never saw any report of the car being moved after this.
Mm-hmm.
And it also makes sense to me that it would be further from her door, because at that time of night, there's going to be less spots available, since most people who live in that neighborhood are probably home. And had to park their cars on the street. So that makes sense why her car was not in front of her apartment like normal.
Mm-hmm.
But what I just don't understand is getting out on the passenger side. Like, if this was indeed Josh, or whoever it may be, he parks the car and he slides over to the passenger side to exit.
Yeah.
Like, why would he do that? Like, fingerprints I don't think is a viable answer, because they would be on the steering wheel. Like,
yeah, and it would not be easy. Like, in the oldie, Grandma Kelly's going to take you back to the oldie days when it used to just be you had cup holders in a thing that you could flip up, just like in the back seat and the front seat.
Yeah, and have like a bench seat. Yeah.
Right, but this is 2018. The center console likely didn't move on this car, I would imagine. So if he was
she had like
driving,
a small SUV, so I'm sure it had a console in it.
Yeah, so he would have had to like hop the console and then get out. It doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you were doing something in that car that you didn't want people to know that you were driving it.
Yeah, and this is only an hour after she was seen on the camera footage at the ATM.
Yeah.
An hour is not a lot of time.
No. And I don't want to sound like
I'm so confused by it.
I don't want to sound like a serial killer, but you and I and a lot of other people in the true crime podcast community know we've looked at a lot of these cases. I personally don't believe an hour is a long enough time for you to commit a murder, have a body, dump the body, and get back to the apartment with the information that we have, like no clues. I don't believe that would take an hour. It seems too short. I would say you would need longer, way long, like, especially if you have, we don't know that Kierra was murdered. I hope she wasn't,
right?
But
exactly.
even if you were hiding her somewhere or something like that, I don't know. An hour just does not seem like enough time to me.
Which it adds so many questions, because there's unfortunately nothing else new in this case. Like that was it. That was released in summer of 2022, and we're a year later now. And from my understanding, Kierra's family still hasn't gotten a hold of Josh. And it seems like he's currently living in Louisiana with the mother of 2 of his kids.
What? So, wow. So this dude, that's also a ping for me. That ping right there. You're not talking to any of these people. Why is that? Why would you not? If you, we've talked about this a little off air, a little on air. if you have nothing to hide, why are you not talking to them and telling them?
Or just like get a lawyer to help.
Yes, we've discussed.
Clearly create your narrative. Like, go ahead and get a lawyer. Like, that's not suspect in my opinion. Like,
exactly. I was going to say,
that's fine.
We've talked about that a lot too. Like, if you want to lawyer up right away, do it. Lawyer up. But then also discuss with your lawyer what kind of communication you should have with this family, because there should be
you're the liaison. That's their job in this part of the investigation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really kind of all we know. But there was one point in my research that I really dove into a world that is very unknown to me. TikTok. Kelly, I am not a social media person. I don't even really know how TikTok works. It's just, I avoid it at all costs.
Y'all bear with us on our TikTok account. I am doing my best, but I am also a geriatric millennial. So, listen, I don't have any funny dances to do about true crime, but I am trying to put things out on it. And there are very cool, good accounts on TikTok about true crime.
There absolutely are. And I was exploring them a little bit because I just did like a basic search for Kierra Coles, and that's kind of where I started my research. And like the third page down led me to TikTok. So I'm like, I'll check some of this out. I ended up not going with them as a source too much just because I really wanted to use as many credited news sources, which a lot of them reference. But I wanted to take what they reference and kind of build my own from what they were saying and make my own case here.
Absolutely. I feel like TikTok these days is a lot like how, Sam, you understand, we grew up in the era where the internet first became a thing, and it used to be when you wrote your reports for school that Wikipedia was not considered a viable source, which today is bonkers. People use Wikipedia as a source all the time. I do it myself as well. But I would recommend handling TikTok in that old internet fashion, that it's not necessarily a reliable source, which we've seen not solely, but which we've seen to a crazy extent in the terrible murders in Idaho, where there was a TikToker who was doggedly harassing a professor at the University of Idaho, claiming that she was involved with this crime when there is absolutely no credibility to that. So
she was like out of the state at the time. Yeah, I very much agree.
There's nothing connecting her to it. So yeah, I know you agree as well. But I'm just like, I got to put that out there. Just use it like we used to use it, Wikipedia, and find supporting sources.
Be cautious with it. But I do feel like there was somebody on TikTok who made a very accurate statement, and it was Miss Q News, and she said, "Where's Kierra Coles? This seems like a rhetorical question." And I just feel like that really kind of sums up how I've felt about this case since it happened. Because the articles initially were so simple, and they just had this video, which has come out as false, and they didn't even really give much of a timeline. It just, nothing really made sense. And it's like, okay, yes, where is Kierra? But no one had an answer. It was just, that was it.
Right. That's a very powerful statement. That is a rhetorical
That was the first
question.
TikTok I watched, and I'm like, that's a really great way of putting this. It's a very sad way of putting it, but it's a good way.
It is. It's awful, but I like accounts like this because of that way of reporting, because you just hear tidbits that you're like, that resonates with me. And that
Yeah,
resonates
and
with
they did
this
a good
case.
narrative on that NBC video I mentioned earlier that interviewed Regina and Karen. That was a lot of her video. She played that in the background and then just talked about that and some details in this case. So I did feel like her video was good. I just wanted to take the narrative that I watched from the direct NBC News segment.
Right.
But I felt like I needed to call that out because it's exactly how I have felt for the last nearly 5 years now that Kierra's been missing. And like it seems like this case is unsolvable, but I don't think that's the case. We don't have much information. It seems like we are getting false information from the police, but I don't think that means that this case can't be solved. I just think that people need to start talking. I think that's the next step to get this solved. And whether it is Josh talking or somebody else, like, as I said, Josh might not be involved. But that's the only thing that will bring things forward, I believe, at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. People need to start coming forward. And I know that that's not an ideal situation to be in, but your little tiny interaction at the bus stop, your little small moment where you ran into somebody who looked like he had a lot of strange things he was carrying. You just don't know what's important and what's not. So just start talking.
Exactly.
Start coming forward.
And the last update that I heard as of March 2023, the reward is currently $63,000 for information on Kierra's disappearance or whereabouts. So I do want to give you a bit of a description of her. She is 5 feet 4 inches tall or 5 feet 5 inches tall. I've seen a couple different reports. She's about 125 pounds. She has a tattoo of a heart on her right hand. And I believe it's a heart with like a heartbeat monitor line on it. I've seen some pictures. And she also has a tattoo that says Lucky Libra on her back. If you have any information that could help find Kierra, please call 312-747-8274. We'll put that number in the show notes and on social media. And I really think this case can be solved. People just have to talk.
I hate to jump in here too with just like another little thing here, but if everything is in a dreamy dream world, and hopefully this is true, she would likely have, at this point, have a 4-year-old child with her.
Yes.
So, in addition to everything Sam's just said, hopefully there would be a toddler age child with her.
Yes. That's definitely what we are all hoping for, is that she can come home with her child and be with her family and be able to live a happy life.
Absolutely.
But that is all that we have today. Do you have any final thoughts?
My final thought is just that I'm so glad that the postal community has rallied around this, because I'm sure they're doing a lot behind the scenes to, like, not just, I mean, Karen is obviously amazing in keeping this in the public eye, but it seems like her community of her job doesn't want to let this fall off the radar either. And I think that's everything for these cases. That you just have people who will not and cannot let it go because it's not solved. And I agree with you. I think this is one that can be. This was only 2018. Like, I agree with you. I think this one, we could see it solved. I wish.
And I do appreciate, I've seen it in the news many times over the years. It's not like this case is never talked about. It's just there's no new
Right.
information. They kind of re-release everything we already know. So it's great that
Right.
her name is being put out there. Her face is being put out there. And we need to
Mhm.
keep that going
Yes.
while
Absolutely.
encouraging people to come forward.
Yes. Yes.
But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutthiscase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.